I want to welcome you to our very first student research colloquium on human rights and social change. This is going to be an annual event, and so we encourage you to come back again next year. If you are a student, consider telling your peers about this opportunity to present their work that's happening here. And we're really excited to share what's been going on, what we are doing in our research here. And so I want to just start with some housekeeping, then we'll go through and do the presentations. So to start with, this slide shows you how you can ask a question, how you can use the chat. So it's circled this button. It looks like a little bubble. You've probably seen it by now. You can go ahead and post questions into the chat. If you have questions during a presentation, I encourage you to write it into the chat as you need to, but then maybe hit send after the presentation so that it's not popping up necessarily during the presentation itself. And then during the question and answer session, feel free to put questions into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. I'll be facilitating the question and answer sessions. I also wanted to just point out that we are recording today's presentation so that it will be posted on our website so that people who aren't able to access the presentation right now as we speak will be able to view these recordings at a later date. Let's see. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. The first presentation is by Melissa Mcclure Fuller, and we're going to watch her presentation on bisexuality and mental health among young adults during COVID-19. Well, please join me in a round of applause for our first three presenters. We're gonna pause now for, we can take up to 15 minutes for question and answer. And I know these presentations have some content that is in conversation, right? There's a lot that we can relate across the presentation. So as you have questions, feel free to ask a question directly to one of the presenters. They're all here today with us. Or if you have a question about the research that could be answered by several of the presenters, feel free to ask those as well. And I'd encourage you to either use the chat or if you want to have your video on and raise your actual hand, I can call on you, or if you would like to raise your virtual hand here like that, using the reactions tool, you can do that too, and I will know to call on you. So Melissa asked a question of Vincent and Jace. Melissa wrote, "I enjoyed your topic so much. I was wondering if you have future plans for your research. This is such important work."
Hello. Yeah, for our research study, it's still ongoing. So we started this research project around last spring. And this is preliminary data, so we have a huge data set that we're still working with, as we have survey data from over 300 plus youth across the US, and also a bunch of qualitative interviews that we haven't coded yet. So we're hoping to be able to dive deeper into all the data that we collected throughout this past year and throughout the next few months, so that we're able to analyze it, and then also follow up with some of our initial interviewees so that we can use the qualitative data along with the quantitative data to tell like a whole picture story of the experiences of transgender and gender non-conforming youth during the time of COVID, and to be able to hopefully publish some papers in the future to help educators and people who work with youth.
I will go ahead and ask another question. This is a question for Melissa. And you showed us data that indicate that bisexual young adults have worse mental health outcomes than heterosexual young adults. And I wondered if you know how their experiences differ or are similar to the experiences of the gay or lesbian students or those who selected mostly heterosexual, when you showed us that pie chart that had the different sexual orientations that people identified as.
Thank you. That's a great question. And in that process, I've kind of forgotten what you said, but I think what you're asking is how I knew or how the data showed that the needs were different. So what we saw across the board in the data was that in terms of feeling loneliness every day, suicidal ideation, anxiety, and depression, all of those areas were higher for bisexual young adults over any other group that we saw. It was also, in terms of the breakout, there was heterosexual adults, and then bisexual adults were the second largest group in terms of the sample size that was studied. So that gave us some good indicators that that particular group has some pretty significant needs that are different. In terms of sample size, the gay and lesbian participants in this study, it was quite a small number. So I looked to research and read a couple of other articles, and the other articles that I referenced also said very similar things, that bisexual adults, young adults, had greater mental health needs. So the next thing that I plan to look at is just kind of uncovering a little bit more of why that is. I have a suspicion that part of it could be that area in terms of offering support is a little less recognized in the community than those that identify as gay or lesbian, transgender. So that's kind of my thoughts, but we'll see where the research leads.
Thank you. That sort of, you kind of roped in a question that we have in the chat from Hillary, which is asking if there were follow-on questions that you found you wanted to ask after you got back the initial responses. So I think, Melissa, you sort of talked about some area. I wonder if Thea and Vin and Jace, if there are specific areas that you can imagine your research going, or that if you had an opportunity to conduct future research, you might kind of ask questions in those areas. Maybe we can start with Thea.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Some questions that came up during my research. I really wanted to learn more if this, because the survey data that we collected was of the San Jose social network, San Jose students' social networks. And I wanted to find out if this can be like truly representative of the population, maybe just in the United States or just California. So if a question that came up for me would be, how well can this translate to a larger population? And something I would like to learn more about is if we were to run regressions on this, if we would see, if it would align with what we concluded with in the research, in an analysis that we did. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Vin or Jace, would you like to share if there are particular areas that you imagine your work going, or that you that this kind of sparked curiosity about anything in particular that you'd like to learn more about through future research?
Something that our group was really interested in with our faculty mentor was the concept of how COVID allowed people to have more time to explore their identities. So we were just really curious about what implications can we draw from that to be able to like help LGBTQ plus youth, like explore their identities and feel supported in a world post-COVID where, they might be getting back to their daily lives and, whatever that may be. And Jace was also interested in how neurodivergency may play a role in, and other different identities as well, and how youth access support.
Yeah, thank you so much. One of the questions, Vin, while you're still on, that I had for you about your work was the age range that you included in your study was rather broad, 13 to 25, and there's so much around identity formation that's taking place then. And layering on COVID and the particular identity formation processes that may happen for gender nonconforming and transgender youth. I wondered if you were able to, in the qualitative research already, see differences between the younger end of that spectrum and the older end of that spectrum in terms of how they accessed social support, or if you have reflections about that kind of age distribution.
From what I've drawn from like just my experiences being able to be in the process of conducting interviews, there were some differences in terms of living situation that played a role in terms of how youth access support. So a lot of the younger youth, they may be attending like middle school or high school, and that means they might be living at home with their parents. So support in that case looks different because they may have to like utilize, you know, like online interactions more often to be able to connect with their friends. Or, you know, there's some parents who put restrictions on their kids like access to technology as well. So there were other like layers and factors in addition to not being out at home that they had to navigate. And as for the older youth who are in, you know, the college age range and beyond, some of them were living on campus, some of them were living off campus, and there were changes in living situation that influenced how they accessed their college friends, or maybe some of the people who were in their lives before, but now they can't see on a regular basis. So it really depends on their personal like ways of reaching out for support. But in general, we've noticed that a lot of people have been tapping into online means, and some people find benefits and some people find drawbacks. So yeah, a lot of big mixes, but living situation was a key factor in that too, in addition to the stage they are in terms of their LGBTQ plus like identity development and how much they know about their identities.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. Thinking about the three presentations together, although Vin and Jace, I'm not sure whether you measured loneliness. That was obviously a key part of what people reflect on when they think about their social support and their social connectedness. So I wonder if any of the four of you, the three presentations of four of you as speakers, have thoughts about what people who want to support the population that you're describing. So whether it is narrowing in on college students or narrowing in on young adults or youth with particular gender identities or sexual orientations, I wonder if there are things that you have thought about as possible interventions or ways that people can support either from within those communities or outside support offering in. So for example, like an institution like San Jose State, how we can support people who are struggling with loneliness during this pandemic, or thinking about as we kind of return to more campus interactions, but there are still a lot of people who might be fearful, how we can do that, if you have thoughts about that.
I can speak a little bit about this. So when we were looking at like the open-ended survey questions, the people did talk about specific actions they wanted people to take, like such as in a Zoom world, they wanted people to like make sure they put their pronouns in their name, because a lot of that is like very affirming, and also making sure they don't out themselves if they do so. So a lot of it is just better, at least for the college age range, it's better policies that implement ways of allowing them to be their authentic selves, and also having a way to see that their peers do support them. So like in such the case of like Canvas, seeing like personally for me, as I'm part of this population, right? Seeing that people put their pronouns in their Canvas name is very affirming, and saying that like these people care about what you're going through and they're trying to make an effort to support you.
Thank you so much, Jace. I really appreciate that very concrete example. I, in fact, have just renamed myself so that I have my pronouns there, but thank you so much for that really concrete suggestion about what we can do. Melissa, I think you also had your hand raised. Did you have a comment as well?
Yes, and you'll see I also renamed myself. Usually my pronouns are on here, so I apologize that they weren't. Yeah, in the past, I've done a little bit of research on different in terms of like how to address sexual education and that sort of thing across the board for different sexual identities. And one thing that keeps coming up is really capitalizing on the use of social media, because a lot of young adults and teenagers are already on their phones a lot. And of course, there can be a negative aspect of that, but there can also be an immense reach in terms of audience, maybe potential dates, things like that, that just create this connection between others that have similar attributes to yourself, so that you're feeling connected, you're feeling part of a community. And especially in those communities where maybe there aren't a lot of people in your city that identify the same way you do, social media can be a way to really extend that reach.
Thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up the Q&A section for these first 3 presentations, and we're going to pivot to screen the last 3 presentations for this session. What we'll do is we'll do those 3 presentations, have another Q&A, and then if there's time remaining, which there should be, then we can have a broader Q&A, because many of you'll see that many of the presentations that are part of this second half still connect back to the themes that have been started with our first 3 speakers. So the next presentation that we'll be watching is by Kim Nguyen, and it is on coping strategies utilized by young adults during COVID-19. Thank you so much, Kim. And our next presentation is by Negin Trahanian. And this presentation is on the types of support for the LGBTQ+ community, and specifically in athletics. Thank you very much. And our last presentation of the session is by Daisy Perez, and it is on racial and ethnic differences in the willingness to receive a COVID-19 vaccination among the social networks of diverse public health students. All right, please join me in a big round of applause for all 3 of our presenting panelists there. Wonderful job. So I wanted to open it up again to questions for the 3 panelists that we just heard from. And I might actually start us off with a question. Daisy, the last presentation, you shared that you thought that public health students might have been more primed in particular to be suspicious of the vaccine and other information, because during the previous administration, the CDC had released inaccurate information, and public health students were aware that this information was inaccurate and that there were other areas where there were inconsistencies. And I wondered, what do you think that public health officials can do to earn the public's trust? And I was going to say earn back, but I think that we can safely say that there are some communities that may have never trusted public health officials, and other communities that may have become more skeptical or more suspicious. And I wonder if you have thoughts about what public health people can do to earn the trust of the public.
Hi, Dr. Worthen. That's a really good question. So just from what, in my personal opinion, transparency goes a really long way when it comes to trust. So I think that's probably the thing that should be at the top of like the priority list. Yeah, transparency, definitely. I think it's also important, just because for those that are in the public health field, it's really important to take note of you're in a very powerful position. And I know that, it's kind of one of those things that, money talks, even in politics and so many things. I feel like for those that are in power, it's a lot to ask, but not to let that influence what it is that they put out there in the world, not to just put out certain information because a certain corporation or anything like that, believes that it is best to put that kind of information out there. Really work for the people rather than for those who can provide funding and all of that and really steer the way that they make decisions.
Thank you so much. Are there other questions? Again, feel free to type your question directly into the chat, or if you want, you can, if you have your video on, you can raise your actual hand, or if you have your video off, you can raise your virtual hand. And I see a question in the chat from Melissa saying, I was curious if any of the presenters have seen public health campaigns or messaging that they particularly liked or felt worked well.
I can go ahead and answer just from what I've seen. You know, being like in this day and age, I am on Instagram a lot, and I like to follow a lot of like public health clubs that are on campus. And one that I really enjoy following is the San Jose State, I think it's Women's Wellness Club. And apart from just posting like flyers that, you know, give information that are really helpful, a lot of their officers actually make videos where they discuss like wellness practices and just offer a lot of advice. So it feels like a more personal type of method of communication, you know, rather than just a flyer with no face to it. So I think that's something that's really captured my attention.
Thank you so much. Any of the other panelists, Kim or Megan, and I'm sorry, I actually don't know how to pronounce whether it's Nagin or Negan or so please chime in and correct me.
It's Nagin.
So I apologize for saying it incorrectly earlier. Great. Nagin, did you have any suggestions or ideas about campaigns, either public health or your presentation was really about discrimination and lack of support for LGBTQ athletes. And I wonder if you've seen any campaigns that have promoted positive attitudes and or advocacy around laws for LGBTQ athletes.
No, I haven't really seen anything like that, especially not recently, unfortunately.
That is definitely an area that people who are interested in doing further work or social marketing, maybe note that that's an area well deserving of attention. Nagin, I had a question for you. You mentioned in your presentation several discriminatory policies and laws that make participation in athletics either impossible in somebody's actual gender or make it difficult to do for different athletes. And I wonder if you have seen examples of gender affirming laws or policies in athletics or policies or laws that are supportive of LGBTQ athletes that we could advocate for the adoption of in other areas where those policies may not be present.
Yeah, actually the NCAA has a policy where if you are, after a year of hormone therapy, you are allowed to participate in the team with that gender you identify as. So if you're female to male transition after a year of being on testosterone, you can participate on male teams, and the other way around for people transitioning to be female.
That's great, thank you. Do you happen to know, because you had mentioned states, I think you had said that there were 28 states that had laws on the books that are that make it impossible, right, for athletes. Do you know how those laws intersect, how an NCAA policy that's gender affirming intersects with a state law? I'm just curious.
I don't really know, but the NCAA has been keeping an eye on these laws and are trying to fight back against them. I believe most of these laws mostly apply to people who aren't in collegiate athletics, because the NCAA, as long as I know, will just allow anyone to, no matter their state, to participate.
Great, thank you so much. I see a question came into the chat regarding trust in public health. Do you think that the assaults on public health officials that we have seen in Michigan, Ohio, New York, and in Santa Cruz, for example, have increased or undermined trust in their advice?
I think that's kind of a tough call, just because I have heard a lot about these situations. I feel like maybe it would undermine like their trust, just because, you know, I feel like not everyone is really up to date with what's going on like in the public health area. So if they see that many citizens of a particular city are like roughly criticizing a public health official, a lot of people might just follow that chain and see that, you know, if so many people from my city are not for this person and do not believe this person should be like in this position, then, you know, a lot of people might follow from that. So I think that more than anything, it would contribute to some more citizens not trusting public health officials.
I have a question for Kim. So you presented about different coping strategies that 18 to 25-year-olds have been employing to manage stress during the pandemic, and the association between those coping strategies and different mental health outcomes. And I wondered if, when you were looking at that, if there was anything that surprised you, or anything that you thought, you know, oh my gosh, that I wasn't expecting that, either in terms of how frequent some of these strategies were, or in terms of the relationship between the strategies and people's experiences.
Hello. I think the thing that stood out most to me was the low prevalence of using drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms. Especially, I've done research in other classes, and SGSU has a big issue with binge drinking. So I guess it is good news to see this low prevalence. It might be because we are social isolating. So that might be why. It is nice to see that people are reaching out to friends and family, and that it has a positive effect on the mental health well-being. But my heart also goes out to what Vincent also spoke about in the previous presentation, how some students and members of the community aren't able to access that. Yeah, I think we also had a high prevalence of watching TV and arts and participating in hobbies. And yeah, I think we had a lot of previous research that supported our what we found. And I don't think we found any significant data on using pets either, but it's interesting.
I'll acknowledge that as the advisor on that study, I was very surprised not to find data on pets being so helpful, because as I noticed in my classes, a lot of students are, you know, attending class with their pet. Their pet makes an appearance. My pet has made appearances in my classes. So yeah, I was surprised there was no data on those benefits. So let's broaden out, and I'm happy to moderate questions for any of the panelists, or if panelists have questions for each other, or kind of broad questions about the overall topic. I mean, many of the presentations today have been about mental health and the inequities and the burden specifically facing sexual and gender minority young adults, youth, adults. And also in Daisy's presentation, we saw about really quite large differences in the willingness to get vaccinated by race and ethnicity. And we can kind of use those data to generally think about how racial and ethnic groups experience the pandemic differently, depending on the contextual factors and access to different resources and lack of access to different resources. So I wonder if there are broad questions that anybody has for any of the panelists.
I was curious on what everyone's next steps were. We found a lot of meaningful data, and in what ways I think for me personally, I found a lot of interesting data on how social connections can be useful in terms of mental well-being, and it's encouraged me to like reach out to CAPS and the psychology department to do further research on it. I'm just wondering if what everyone else has plans for this, for their research.
Can I go ahead and call on people? Maybe I'll ask in the order of the presentation. So we'll start with Melissa.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have thought about this a lot because there's a real lack of research about the bisexual community in terms of mental health needs. So I would really like to pursue writing an article, some sort of publication that highlights this disparity and really talks a little bit more about the needs of this population.
Thank you. And then Thea.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kim. I definitely agree that the research that we conducted is something that would definitely be helpful. This was a very unprecedented situation with the lockdown. So I think that this would be very useful data for like future emergency situations like this, and could be utilized for further study. Something that I would also like to look into more is how like family situations and what the comments said in the chat box, and how death and sickness can be an an exacerbating factor. So I would definitely like to pursue this data further in that.
Thank you. Vin or Jace? Maybe both of you. We'll start with Vin.
Yeah, for our research, we hope to be able to kind of disaggregate the data and see if there's any like differences in terms of different like identities within, you know, transgender and gender nonconforming youth, like if there's differences in how they access support or how much, you know, support they get. And also we would like to kind of explore more about just how to be able to strengthen support systems in general for our population that is super vulnerable and is being targeted even by current, you know, politicians and legislation. So we hope to be able to, you know, just spread more awareness and get knowledge out to the community and the world to serve our transgender and gender nonconforming youth.
Okay, we'll go on. So Kim, you had mentioned that you were interested in reaching out to the counseling and psychological services. I wonder if there were other things that you wanted to add about what you might have as next step.
I'm currently working on we're in partnership with CAPS and the psychology department, we're launching a cross-sectional survey this summer about access to CAPS resources, and especially in today's political, and if there's like enough service provided to students with the current research. I'd really like to, and I worked with Daisy for vaccine hesitancy. I'd really like to, in parallel to the campus reopening, I'd really like to share this research with students through tabling or reaching out to CAPS and having workshops, or at the very least having digital media released through email. That'd be great. Just spreading this information to more people.
Thank you, Nagin.
Actually, since the theme of this is how everything relates to COVID, unfortunately, I couldn't find anything how COVID affected the support systems of LGBTQ athletes. And so I want to look into how it affected their support system, and
like how it affected NCAA's or athlete allies' ability to support athletes, or the loss of emotional and social support from their teammates and coaches affected athletes directly, and things like that.
Thank you so much. And Daisy.
So given the context of how vaccine willingness was back in October 2020 versus more recent months, luckily a lot of racial minority groups are actually more willing to receive vaccinations nowadays, which is like excellent news. I believe that this might just be due to a lot of what's been going on since quarantine, you know, trying to give these groups support. So, you know, just I would really hope that this could continue, just because racial minorities do face many obstacles even outside of COVID vaccines. It's just great to see like what's going on. So it would be really cool to participate in supporting these racial groups in the future. And in terms of trust, I was really surprised to see that the Black and Latinx participants were least likely to trust their family and friends with, I think it was a COVID vaccine information. You know, so I would really like to look into that further, just because I know that these two racial groups have a really strong family morals, like in the forefront of how they practice things. So I would just like to probably research why that is.
Thank you. This is some really exciting work to come from our student researchers, both in terms of further exploration and in terms of the interventions that you're envisioning to make an impact. Adding on to what Daisy was just sharing, we are planning an event for very early in the fall semester that is organized in collaboration with the Solidarity Network. So that includes the San Jose State Pride Center, the Block, which is our Black Leadership and Organizing or Opportunities Center, the Chicanx and Latinx Success Center, the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion, and some other organizations to talk about the vaccine, particularly in light of the CSU and UC systems announcing that they will be requiring people who are on campus, faculty, staff, and students to take the vaccine if it is fully approved, or if and when vaccines are approved by the FDA. And so it is our anticipation that there will be a lot of questions about the vaccine. And so we'll be hosting an event where we can both provide the data about the vaccine to these different communities and to our populations, our students, and their social networks, but also where we can really dive into some of these questions that people have, perhaps misconceptions, perhaps completely accurate fears about different things, and we can talk in a safe way that is respectful and honoring that there are a lot of differences within our groups and populations about where they get information from. So stay tuned for that event. I think it'll be a really great opportunity for us to build more from this work that was showcased today. We are going to take a break now. As you exit this session, we'll be returning to the main room for the closing session. Erin has just placed in the chat the link for the program and attendee guide, which gives you the link for the Zoom room where we'll be in our main room. So I wanted to give another round of applause for all of our presentations today. Thank you so much for sharing the work that you are doing. The slides and the recording of this session will be available on the conference site, and we'll also provide you with links to access them via email at the end of the conference. So yeah, so as you exit this room, please use the link in the chat to rejoin the seminar, where you're going to hear a little bit more about the other student research sessions. We'll do a report back, and then we're going to announce the winners of awards for student research and faculty award for commitment to human rights and social change. So thank you so much for coming today. And we look forward to hosting you again in the main room. Thank you.